Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the murder of Jessica King. Now, this was a murder that happened many years ago. It was 1991. This woman was, I should say, a young lady was murdered on March 16th, 1991. It was in a graveyard in Ohio, I believe. She was Sun in Libra, and her moon is in Taurus. And I want to talk a little bit about some placements, natal chart, and transits, which might have attributed to this event, sadly. And first thing off is, okay, she was born on September 24th, 1975. Again, the Sun in Libra and the Moon in Taurus. And the thing about this is, keep in mind, in astrology, the Sun is about life. And she had the Sun based on the solar sunrise chart. I didn't have the time of birth, of course, so I had to improvise once again and do a solar sunrise chart for her. Now, the thing is, again, the Sun is about life, and based on the sunrise time, she had the Sun in Libra at 0 degrees. 0 degrees in astrology can, of course, be a critical degree. The Sun in Libra is at its fall, of course, by position. It was also conjunct her Pluto in the first house of the early childhood in the solar sunrise chart. Now, many people may not perceive that, of course, being like 14 years old, she was when she died, she was 15 years old, and that may not be considered the early childhood, but it's still an early part of one's life. I saw something. There was another person that got, this person committed suicide. Many of you may remember Amanda Todd. If I remember correctly, her Pluto was conjunct her Sun. And the thing about it is, and it was all, and I believe her Pluto was also in the first house in her solar sunrise chart. And I've noticed some things where people have Pluto in their first house, whether it could be a natal chart or solar sunrise chart, that there seems to be a greater propensity for an earlier death. And the thing about it is, Pluto is also can be connected with murder. And people that have Pluto on their Sun, they need to be, I think, a little bit more prudent and careful about it, especially in their early life and their surroundings and who they're involved in, because it does seem like there's a greater proclivity for death when people have that in the early part of their life, and if they do have that placement, especially if it's close, if it's in the first house and close to the Sun as well. And the thing about it is, too, she also had, based on the solar sunrise chart, the North Node at a critical degree, 22 degrees Scorpio. And it was at the time of her death, it was conjunct by, or at least a loose conjunction by transit Pluto. When you're talking about the North Node, when it's involved in a transit, whether it's actually the transiting energy or if it's being hit by another planet or astrological energy in transit, it can often be about issues one may have to confront or address. And sadly, you're talking about Pluto and Scorpio energy. This could have been an indicator where she had to confront an issue. Sadly, this was about an issue that had to be addressed. This was about the future, sadly, being tied into death. I do believe this played a role in this. It may not have been an integral role. There's a number of transits and indicators in her chart, I would say, that could be tied into this. Now, another thing, and you're talking about, being in Scorpio, perhaps rather sadistic energy as well, and vengeful energy, considering what happened was that night she got murdered. Jessica King, had been raped, and then she escaped her captor, apparently, and the captor, ironically enough, he was a Sun of Scorpio, and he went after her and then killed her in that graveyard. So anyway, another thing too is, based on the solar sunrise chart, she has Neptune and Sagittarius in the third house. Now, Neptune in the third house can be, people have to be careful about being beguiled or deceived in communications. And the thing is, people that have that placement, this is a thing where you just have to be, extra careful in terms of what people say. And you have to, say something too. She also had Scorpio on the cusp of that third house in her solar sunrise chart, and that could be about, it could manifest in some cases in being manipulated in communications and in matters with short journeys. She seemed very trusting. She went into the car with a stranger that she didn't know, and that ultimately led to her, sadly, her demise, her death later on. Um, Another thing to talk about in her chart is that she had a on in the solar sunrise chart, she has Capricorn on the fourth house cusp of the end of life, and the Capricorn on the fourth house cusp can be, the end of life might have some kind of restrictions, or there might be some despondency connected with it, some dejection or sadness or sorrow. And another thing too is that the ruler of that fourth house was in the 10th house of notoriety. So sadly, this may have manifested in her end of life getting some kind of notoriety and exposure. And of course, this has been seen on TV. I saw this in the show. I mean, this has been on a number of shows on TV. I think it was on like an Unsolved Mystery episode, and the other show, I believe it's like Dead of Night or something similar, or Dead Silent. Um, and that's where I saw it. Now, another thing too is at this time, and as far as her fourth house goes, she had some transits hitting it. Transit Neptune was in the fourth house, and interestingly enough, Neptune can be connected with fog, and I would say mist as well. Neptune is very nebulous and unclear. And when she was being chased in that graveyard, the conditions, based on what they were showing on the television show Dead Silent, it was a very kind of foggy and kind of looked like misty kind of atmosphere at the time. It was dark, of course, because this was at night, and it was very, and it looked like there was a strong fog as well at this time. And remember that the fourth house can also be associated with graves, and she was in a place, of course, that had graves in it. And uh, and she also had transit Saturn, and the North Node were in that fourth house as well. The interesting thing about Uranus being in there is the fact that Uranus can be connected with the unusual. She had left some kind of like a knee impression by one of the graves. Of course, the knee can be associated with Capricorn, and the fourth house can correspond with graves, sadly. So, and another thing too is that at this time she also, you're talking about when you talk about the North Node in transit again, this could be about an issue one may have to confront and address. In the North Node in Capricorn, it could be an issue that has a lot of dejection and despondency and sorrow. And you're talking about the fourth house again, the latter part of life or the end of life. And sadly, the latter part of life, what she should have been able to live, was restricted, unfortunately, in this case. And another thing too is there's a lot of people that might not put a lot of credence in the Arabic parts in one's astrology chart, but based on the solar sunrise chart, her Arabic part of peril, of course, peril can be like danger, and was in being in perilous situations, was in Capricorn in the fourth house of the end of life, and of course fourth house can be associated with graves. It was Capricorn, I would say, could also be associated with older people. This was an older person that murdered her. Now, another thing is that at this time, transit Sun in Pisces, and of course that could be associated with fog as well, and things that are nebulous and unclear. Transit Sun in Pisces was making a conjunction to her natal Black Moon Lilith in her chart, and Black Moon Lilith is another thing where a lot of people, I'm sure, don't really see it as being a significant point in one's astrological chart, but I just think it's too coincidental with the Black Moon being involved, and especially with a fairly close conjunction, for it not to play a role in this situation at the time. Now, this is the way this might have manifested and panned out. This transit Sun in Pisces on one's black numerals in Pisces. You're talking about dominance, which of course could be associated with the Sun, dominance through a male, um, and that could be the Sun as well. The Sun can be about dominant males, and I mean, I think in this case it was about a male showing certain dominance. And the thing about this is, and really you're talking about in Pisces, very senseless energy. I'm wondering if this might have been drug fueled at the time or alcohol related. I wonder if the person might have been on some kind of drugs or alcohol, considering this placement is in Pisces. Now, it's also, you're talking about rape with uninhibited erotic energy. The black numerals can be associated with very erotic sexual energy, and you're talking about that energy that could be unrestrained and uninhibited. And I would say Pisces could have played a role in this. And keep in mind too that the black moon oath in astrology can also be about what may put one in a strong state of fright or trepidation. And with the black moon oath being in Pisces in her natal chart, I think that could be an indicator that being in a situation where one could be a victim, one may have to surrender their will, or they have to, or being overly passive or seen as weak, being in a situation where one has to escape. Those are all things associated with Pisces, and sadly, the sun hitting it could shine the light on that, so to speak. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, at this time as well, transit Venus in Aries was conjunct her natal Chiron at this time. And she did have injuries to the head, the skull. I believe this is, you're talking about Aries can be associated with the head in astrology. And in her natal chart, she also has the Chiron and Aries conjunct Jupiter. Now, the thing about it is, as I've stated in previous videos, Jupiter could be very paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. This could increase or enlarge, expand the propensity for wounds, which could include physical ones, and in this case, to the head, to the skull. This is a also too on the solar sunrise chart, she had this, the second house, the 8th house cusp at 26 degrees Aries, which of course is a critical degree in astrology, and the 8th house is associated with death. And at this time as well, she also was going through her Mars return in Gemini, and she had when I heard about this, she had when I saw the online, whether it was, I can't remember if it was from the Dead Silent episode or it was through some blog, she had a number of injuries to her upper body. So it wouldn't surprise me if there were injuries, and you're talking about Gemini, to the arms and the hands at this time as well. And she also, there was, when you're talking about the upper body, generally, I mean, the chest is likely going to be included. There were, at this time, transit Chiron in Cancer was in her 10th house in their solar sunrise chart of notoriety, recognition, exposure. And you're talking about the zodiac sign Cancer can be associated with the chest, breast area, and you're talking about Chiron can be associated with wounds, and sometimes physical ones, physical injuries and suffering. So, and also her natal Mars in Gemini made a square to her sun, so that can increase the propensity for injuries to the physical body. That could be Gemini related. So another thing too is when I look at this as well, it also, that transit Chiron in Cancer was not far from her natal Saturn. It wasn't conjunct by transit, but it was in fairly close proximity. And when you have Saturn involved, that could give more sorrow and really in sadness connected with that energy and despondency with it. She had in her natal chart Saturn in Leo in her 10th house of recognition, and you're talking about, I mean, Saturn being in Leo, and sadly, you're talking about maybe this manifested with her in a rather sad situation where she did get some kind of notoriety and exposure and recognition at this time. And also, I mean, really, there's not much more I wanted to say, can really say about this. The only thing is that, I mean, it's just this was a terrible tragedy, people, and you're talking about somebody, you know, so young to be killed in this way. It's just very appalling. When I was watching the Dead Silent episode, it showed the captor eventually caught up with her, of course, and what happened was she had crashed into a fence that she didn't see, and I guess because it was dark and it looked like the conditions again were foggy and misty, that it obscured her vision, her sight at this time. And the thing is that, you know, she crashes into that fence. I'm just thinking, well, you know, she had actually hadn't been more cognizant of where that fence was and she climbed it, I think there'd be a very good possibility she would have been alive today. Because you think about it, if she had been able to climb that fence, and if she was able to get over to on the other side of the fence before the captor even got to the fence, that would have given her really you know, pretty much a very strong lead on him, and I think it would have been difficult for him to catch up to her. But I mean, what a way, you know, to really to pass away, and just can you imagine the trepidation and fear that one is going through in that situation? I don't even know if I could ever envision or understand that, because something like that, of course, has never happened to me. The other thing I wanted to say is that's sad too, is that according to what I was watching on the Dead Sound episode, she was really like a prototypical student. She was very smart, and what happened was she got sidetracked when she was like around 15 years old or so, somewhere around there, because she became infatuated with this boy that she knew in high school, and of course that became a very strong distraction to her. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.